This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Let's talk for a minute about something people don't always love talking about: money. Like a lot of you, I've always stressed about my finances, and I've also stressed about stressing about my finances. The picture just never quite comes into focus. But that started to change for me about a month ago when I started using Monarch Money. I finally loaded in all my accounts, debts, transactions. It was quick, it was actually kind of fun, and suddenly everything made sense. It's like I was staring at a magic eye poster, and finally it clicked and I saw that sailboat. I can't afford the sailboat, but I think you get the metaphor. Feel organized and confident in your finances with Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clear interface on your laptop or on your phone. Just in the last month since using Monarch, I've been able to see where my money's coming from, where it's going, and from there I've been able to budget, set goals, and have real conversations about what matters most. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code THISDAY at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code THISDAY. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. Let's talk about Lewis and Clark. This day, mid-November 1805, is when the two explorers finally reached the Pacific Ocean. Now, did they do so finding the vaunted Northwest Passage as they were instructed to do by Thomas Jefferson? No, they did not. But they did see some amazing things along the way. They wrote some riveting journals of their 2-year voyage, and then they returned back east to report to Jefferson, and after that, kinda crickets. That's the focus of our episode today. How the story of Lewis and Clark was actually largely forgotten in their time and only revived decades and centuries later as this country started to mark anniversaries and start to tell stories about itself. So, here to discuss how a journey becomes a myth, which is kind of a long journey of its own, are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
I should add a little context here before we dive in, which is that we love the story because it kind of gets at this larger question that we'd love to talk about how kind of the quote-unquote core history of this country got solidified. And of course, we've got our eye on all that because we're heading into America250 next year, the semi-quincentennial. And the country, I think, as it has done on anniversaries in the past, it kind of stops and checks in with itself and tells itself a story about itself. So we're going to do a proper episode as part of our 50-week-long coverage next year about Lewis and Clark, where we will get into all of the things that happened on the journey and all the discoveries and all the characters and so forth. But this is a sort of like meta palate cleanser about the myth of Lewis and Clark. So just a little bit of a programming note there. I will say, in terms of what actually happens on the journey, I mean, they get sent by Jefferson to go out west. Jefferson is convinced, everyone is convinced and very commercially invested in the idea that you would find the so-called Northwest Passage, which is basically, can you get by water all the way across the country? Lewis and Clark fail at that. They reach the Pacific Ocean, but they have to do so by getting out of boats and carrying them across land. And moreover, Jefferson, and he's quoted as saying this, he's kind of like, they're going to find this Northwest Passage. That's the main thing they're going to do. If they sort of do some scientific discovery along the way and take some notes and learn some stuff about our country and its geology and its flora and fauna, great, but that's not really the goal. Then they come back and they're like, hey, we didn't really find the Northwest Passage, but we did take a lot of really great notes, scientific notes about all the flora and fauna and geography. And then Jefferson, he kind of spins it and he's like, great job.
Rebrand.
That was what this was supposed to be about all along. And I mean, there's contemporaneous accounts at the time of people giving Jefferson a hard time for sending those folks out there and for them failing. But he does kind of start to reframe it as a journey of scientific discovery. Nevertheless,
look, he brought back these cool skeletons.
Right.
Look at these guys.
Look at these bones.
So again, we'll get into all that in a 2-part episode sometime next year. But what you need to know is they do have these journals that are very detailed, and obviously over time become very famous. But they, in the initial years after they come back, the journals go unpublished, which basically means that their trip, because it's sort of seen as a failure, fades from the public imagination. Clark and Lewis themselves go on to become governors of territories, and probably not very successful ones. So it just sort of peters out. And their journals are finally printed in 1814, so, about 10 years after they get back, and only 1,400 copies are printed. And moreover, it's all sort of coming out in the middle of the War of 1812. No one really notices. So that sets the stage for basically the fact that, like, for a couple of decades, it's sort of fading into oblivion, Lewis and Clark. So, Kellie, pick it up there. What do the next kind of decades look like, and when do people start talking about Lewis and Clark again?
So they do pretty much remain forgotten. Even, after the War of 1812, we talked about there's not a lot of impact. It's not until the 1840s where another explorer, John Fremont, comes along and kind of replaces Lewis and Clark as like this, prototypical explorer. But it's not really until the late 19th century, I would say, that you really get sort of a turnaround and people start to revisit their journals, and you do have this sort of renewed interest really around the centennial of their expedition. That 100-year marker becomes a new moment to sort of mark these men and what they contributed. I'd also say that, like, the suffragist movement plays a big role in this too. Like, at the turn of the century, women are trying to call out more of their own heroines and people that have done miraculous things. And so Sacagawea becomes a feature in that story where I think she too had also been forgotten. And so reviving her story and how she is so pivotal in Lewis and Clark's story really allows, like, the National American Women's Suffrage Association to just embrace her as this national hero.
So this is so interesting because Sacagawea is the indigenous guide who sort of helps Lewis and Clark over the course of their travels. In 1919, in Charlottesville, Virginia, there's a statue that goes up that honors Meriwether Lewis and William Clark and Sacagawea. But it's really about Lewis because Lewis was born in Albemarle County, which is where Charlottesville is. And so what it ends up being is this statue with Lewis and Clark, these two strapping white men, like, standing large. And Sacagawea is, like, crouched behind them, almost hiding. We can talk later about what happens to that statue. But this is this moment of, like, okay, we now remember that this happened. The journals get republished, some statues start going up in various sculptures. Sacagawea becomes part of the story. And suddenly you have something that begins to look like a piece of American mythology, right? And the native colonist alliance, this kind of era of discovery, especially at a period in which people are, like, freaked out about losing the wide open West. That's a moment when Lewis and Clark suddenly become if not quite mythological figures, like, their stature is suddenly something that people are paying attention to.
But can I ask you a question about the way that a lot of suffragists glom onto the story of Sacagawea, and that, I think, around the 100-year anniversary becomes a big part of the reason that all of this comes rushing back into the public imagination. But is that just because they're looking for examples of strong women in U.S. history? Is there any element there of reckoning and grappling with the fact that she was Native American?
Susan B. Anthony is probably not the person who's going to be reckoning with her native status. No, I think it is that first wave of sort of women suffragists and even, like, women's history, like this work of recovery, is really about, like, can we find women heroes, like, in these different moments in U.S. history? So I think that was a big part of it. And it sort of added to that, there was this kind of, like, noble savage myth. I think we've talked about the Pocahontas exception to the racist laws in places like Virginia, where it was like, oh, well, it's noble to have, like, a little bit of indigenous blood, so we're going to make that an exception to, like, mixed race marriages. Anyway, so I think that it gets complicated, but I don't think that it was about, like, necessarily, like, grappling with the reality of Sacagawea's experience.
Trying to move her from the margins in that way. I wonder too, and Niki, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, like, because this feels like a orals question from grad school, but, like, Frederick Jackson Turner, the Closing of the Frontier, I can't remember the name of his book, but, like, he's writing at the same time as well and talking about how, like, the frontier is closing, that there's really nothing else left to explore. And it kind of feels like the end of an era, the end of empire. And so hearkening back to this moment of like when men discovered things and explored things, and is really a way to sort of introduce Lewis and Clark not just into like the public scene, but also into like the historiography in terms of how we talk about this moment. So seeing them in textbooks then would make more sense, I think, than any other time period.
And this is also like, who's president during this? Teddy Roosevelt, who says that the way men become men, the way that Americans become Americans, is through these encounters with the wild frontier. And as problematic as his approach is, like that really makes a space for Lewis and Clark to become more important national figures.
Yeah, that phrase you used, Kellie, the closing of the frontier, I think it's in 1890, the Census Bureau kind of formally declares like, okay, that's it. There's no more frontier in this country. We've discovered it all. And so you can see that rising thirst then to be like, well, gosh, let's reclaim this moment when there was. And we had, people like Lewis and Clark advancing into the unknown in that way.
A lot of short daily news podcasts focus on just one story. But right now, you probably need more. On Up First from NPR, we bring you 3 of the world's top headlines every day in under 15 minutes. Because no one story can capture all that's happening in this big, crazy world of ours on any given morning. Listen now to the Up First podcast from NPR.
The countdown is on. Holiday shopping season is officially here, and Uncommon Goods takes the stress out of gifting with thousands of unique, high-quality finds you won't see anywhere else. Look, if you go to the Uncommon Goods website, it'll be obvious right away that they look for products that are high-quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the U.S. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses, making every gift feel meaningful and truly one of a kind. And it's not just gifts or items for the home. There is a section on their website labeled Experiences. I recently checked it out, and you can find all sorts of really unique classes, events, and more. I went ahead and bought myself a Trade Secrets coffee tasting class. The box just arrived in the mail, and in it are 5 different kinds of coffee and a guide to preparing them, evaluating them, making tasting notes, basically an at-home blind taste test. There's even a Zoom session I could join with an expert to walk me through it. I'm really excited about this. I'll report back once I find my perfect cup. So, whether it's an experience like a coffee tasting or map making or a toy or an item for the home or kitchen, don't wait. Cross those names off your list before the rush. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/thisday. That's uncommongoods.com/thisday for 15% off. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. This day is brought to you by Quince. Look, you have heard me talk about all the amazing luxury clothing you can get at fair prices from Quince. I'm wearing my very own cable knit sweater right now as I record this. In many parts of the country, the weather is turning colder. It is time to get cozy with sweaters and jackets and Italian wool coats. You can get all of that for great prices on Quince. But can I also direct your attention to a section on their website called Home? That's right, it is not just clothing. And if you want to get cozy, how about a cashmere blanket throw for just $129? There are pillows, blankets, sheets, towels, linens. Quince has it all. You can upgrade your look and your home or apartment. It's time to step into the holiday season with layers made to feel good, look polished, and last. All from Quince. Perfect for gifting or keeping for yourself. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. So that's the 100-year anniversary, which is a big spike. And we mentioned the journals get republished. Sacagawea comes back into the story of all of this. I did notice that they also issued a commemorative gold coin at that time with Lewis and Clark on it. And I will say, actually, as much as this was a moment where they were being rehabilitated, the coin did not sell very well. They made 250,000 of them, and something like 2,000 of them were actually sold. That said, if you do find a 1905 U.S. dollar gold coin commemorating Lewis and Clark, you should hold on to it because one recently sold for $57,000. So,
Shut up!
Hold on to that. Yep.
Hold on to it.
That's interesting.
Let me get a few of those coins.
Wasn't there later, like in our lifetimes, the Sacagawea?
Well, that's exactly right. So
coin?
this is how I started going down this rabbit hole. It's like, wait a minute, weren't there coins about this? And there was a Sacagawea dollar more recently, 200th anniversary, which we'll get to. But there was also at the 100th anniversary a Lewis and Clark commemorative gold coin.
That is worth a bit more.
It's worth a bit more, but at the time was not very popular. So maybe shows that the myth wasn't maybe as sticky as it would become. And I think that's really kind of like the story of going into... Yeah, I think we can breeze through the 20s and 30s and 40s, but now we're starting, into the 60s. I feel like is when it really, really starts to take off for a number of reasons.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why it takes off. I mean, we talked in a recent episode about how in the aftermath of World War II, there's this real drive for Americans to go out and explore. Like they get in their cars, they go on car trips, and I actually think that this is part of it. There's the marking of Western trails by the federal government. The NPS is the National Park Service is going around and it's putting up new monuments and signs. There are new roads that allow you to get out to different parts of the West. And so that brings attention to the history of Western exploration. There's the founding of the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation. That's founded in 1969. And that's basically like a booster group for Lewis and Clark. Now they have a fan club that is going out there, making sure there are signs, making sure there are mentions of Lewis and Clark whenever people are telling the history of exploration in the United States. And then there's also like the space race. There's all of this talk about space, the final frontier. And that leads to a kind of hearkening back to U.S. frontier history, right? Because it's like cowboys in space is the vibe. And so JFK talks every once in a while about Lewis and Clark exploring the unknown and how the astronauts today are sort of like vibing off of that experience. And then one more thing that's happening in the 60s, 70s era. In 1978, there's the creation of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, which is a 3,700-mile trail. And once that opens up, and as hiking becomes like a bigger part of U.S. sort of leisure time, first thousands and then millions of people are following this trail because it actually takes you through some of the prettiest parts of the United States and some... it's probably wrong to call it untrammeled wilderness, but like some pretty isolated and well-preserved places. Because actually Lewis and Clark did not take the most direct route.
I love this, that the Lewis and Clark Trail is so rugged and beautiful because Lewis and Clark were kind of bad at finding an expeditious way across the country.
Making lemonade.
I know, right?
But, we talked about this when we did our episode about, I think this is the episode you were referencing, Niki, our episode about historical markers and kind of this need to. And I got to say, every year I go out with some friends to Montana, and on the drive to where we tend to stay every year, there's like a little marker that's basically like, I don't even think it's Lewis and Clark themselves. I think it's like some members of the Lewis and Clark expedition like stopped here for like one night or whatever. But there's like a little marker and a little trail, and I like get a thrill every time. Like it is so ingrained in us.
Lewis and Clark were here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's remarkable how much that's built into us. But the space race angle is really fascinating too. I mean, I guess it's what happened in the 19 teens as well. It's like the continental U.S. frontier got closed, so now we needed to explore and conquer other parts of the world, and then that maybe
it's when the U.S. Navy takes
right, and then maybe that got sort of spent up in the wake of World War II, and now all of a sudden it's let's go to space, and every time we sort of invoke our heroic.
It's very American exceptionalism. It's very like
totally
look at what we have discovered. Look at what we have found.
The spirit of discovery.
Yeah. Never mind that there are already people there, but you know what I mean. Like, but it's like
how to bring it up.
Yeah, but I do think it tells a narrative about the United States that feels very comfortable and very good. It's like, oh, yes, of course, we were leaders and we were finding all of these trails and places. And I even think it works for sort of an ecological story to talk about like the different things that they discovered and found and the various, birds or plants, like all of that fits into this larger narrative that feels very useful, especially at America 250.
Well,
Yeah.
and funnily enough, around the bicentennial, 1976, those two strains, so this desire to look back at U.S. history, I think plays a big part. People are talking about Lewis and Clark a lot there too, but also I think a growing ecological and environmental awareness of that era sort of recasts them as that thing that they originally did do, which was like a scientific discovery, honoring the beauty of nature, cataloging the kind of wilderness in the U.S. and all its diversity, and that I think is a part of kind of thinking of them as champions of environmentalism starts to kind of enter the equation as well.
Mm-hmm. But let us not discount the pureness of the pioneer mythology that undergirds the Lewis and Clark story. Like the myth does, it is exactly as you're saying, Jody and Kellie. Like it develops over time to match the mores and the ethos of various times. But like in 1996, Stephen Ambrose comes out with a 600-page long book on the Lewis and Clark expedition. And what does he call it? Undaunted Courage. Right. It very much taps into that idea of like these brave pioneers heading out west. Ken Burns then a year later releases a 4-hour PBS documentary on Lewis and Clark. And so you have this kind of remembrance that's coming back into the mainstream that's picking up on all of those developments in the 60s and 70s. And then you have the 200th anniversary of their trip. The Smithsonian goes all in. It's during the Bush administration. Bush presides over the 15-state pageant that's remembering Lewis and Clark. And so it really sort of forcefully gets written back into the American history and American mythology, I would say, in the 1990s and 2000s.
Yeah. There's a historian, a professor, who writes about like how we've made Lewis and Clark fit whatever moment we're going through right now. So she's like 100 years ago, Lewis and Clark are viewed as like symbols of industrial expansion and overseas trade. And then if you go back 50 years ago or maybe 60 years ago, they're looked upon as like cold warriors in the forest, and they like exemplify the virtues of like the company man. And then she says today they're seen as these like multicultural diplomats and proto-ecologists. And it's like we are making sense of them in our own moment. But if you were to ask Lewis and Clark, they would pretty much see themselves as army officers, and not much more beyond that.
I mean, I think building on that historian's point, like I can give you the coda to the statue story, which is the statue was sitting at an intersection in Charlottesville. So again, it's Lewis and Clark, and then Sacagawea sort of crouched behind them, and they couldn't get it taken down. And so a group of sort of teenagers and 20-somethings in the community commandeered a wall of a nearby building and painted indigenous people on it, sort of like staring very disapprovingly at the statue. And then ultimately, when the Confederate statues came down in Charlottesville, they sort of quietly went in and they took down the Lewis and Clark statue as well.
Just make it, more, I don't know, representative of what it was. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think there is something about like still being able to have something that marks what they did without minimalizing Sacagawea and subordinating sort of her role.
And I think you couldn't do it with that statue because that one literally
yes.
subordinated Sacagawea, like physically. And that was kind of the big debate, right? Like, is this the right way to memorialize this expedition?
Yeah. Of course, this continues to be, as we've been saying, contested and revisited and reflecting the current mores and thinking. And I think Lewis and Clark is going to be a big part of the story next year, America 250. But actually, there was an article in the New York Times Magazine just like a couple months ago. Just this summer, and it was called "What If Everything We Know About Sacagawea Is Wrong?" And the thrust of the article, we'll get into this, I think, next year when we do our proper episode on Lewis and Clark and her role in all of this. But, I think part of the myth there is that she helped them and then died young and, had this sort of brief moment where she was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition and was critical to this hinge moment in American history. And in fact, through DNA evidence and oral history, and there's all this just sort of fascinating, like she may have lived for a lot longer, and this Lewis and Clark thing may have just been like one short chapter in a much richer and fuller and sprawling life. And, it's just, what am I saying? I'm saying it's fascinating how this stuff gets revisited and recontextualized.
Yes.
So
there's history and then there's memory, and they are not the same.
Yeah. And especially when it's all based on very spotty journal entries that are obviously being crafted in real time, that are being crafted for an audience who has of Jefferson, who has paid you to go out there to do one thing. So you're going to come back with journal entries that try and prove that your trip was worthwhile. So it's a whole mess of imperfect original sources and myth making and legend and so forth as the years go on. But no doubt Lewis and Clark will be a big part of next year, America 250, and it will be a big part of our commemoration as well, where we will do some more episodes on them. But let's leave our look at how the myth has shifted over the years there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Garter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia, a network of independent, artist-produced podcasts. Don't forget to sign up for our America250 Watch newsletter. Every Thursday, members get exclusive access to analysis and information about the upcoming semi-quincentennial, commentary from our team, and a list of fascinating things that happened that week throughout history. Join in, find out lots more at thisdaypod.com. You can also follow This Day Pod on Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Jacob Feldman is our researcher. Brittany Brown is our editor. My name is Jody Abergan. See you soon.
Radiotopia from PRX.